Chris Matthews, and welcome to Hardball. It's a hot summer evening here in Washington, and we're coming to you from the Hardball Plaza in the heart of Washington. Our guest tonight, the Reverend Al Sharpton and author Christopher Hitchens, on the two things we're taught not to bring up in polite company: religion and politics. First, some big news today. The Senate killed President Bush's immigration plan. After months of deal-making and frustration, supporters fell 14 votes short of the 60 needed to keep the bill alive. The White House today moved closer to a constitutional showdown with Congress, rejecting their subpoena demands. But we begin tonight with the Reverend Al Sharpton and Christopher Hitchens, the author of God is Not Great. Christopher, you knew when you wrote this book, I would be glad to hold it up for pecuniary reasons. When you wrote this book with this title, you knew it was inflammatory because?
No, not a bit of it. It's a mild and furry title. It just says what everyone knows.
And what's that?
That God is man-made, and it was one of our biggest mistakes.
How so?
And that we've made a self-inflicted wound for ourselves. We've told ourselves we wouldn't have morality if it wasn't for a celestial dictator who can convict us of thought crime, who knows what we're thinking even when we're asleep, and who doesn't leave off with us even when we're dead. In North Korea, you have to praise and thank the Lord and his son all the time, incessantly, but at least you can die and get out of North Korea. Out of the religious and theocratic world, you can't escape. It's the origin of totalitarianism. It attacks our self-respect. It undermines our sexuality. It teaches us to disrespect women and to fear our reproductive organs. What, I'm sorry?
Do you feel undermined sexually by God?
Not by God, no. I feel disgusted at the disgust that all monotheisms show for especially the sexuality of the female, and for the fear and guilt that they've inculcated in millions of children down the years, for the lives that have been ruined by shame and inflicted usually by unqualified elderly virgins.
Let me bring the Reverend Al Sharpton here in his unusual role of defender of decency. I'm just kidding, but obviously you've got to take a very establishment position here, Reverend. Usually are something of a critic and a protester. Here you have this man here offering the perhaps unsavory argument that there is no God.
Well, I think that Mr. Hitchens makes a very unusually effective attack on how religion is practiced. But from my readings of his book and our last discussion, he really has yet to establish what that has to do with the existence of God. I mean, you could assault the United States Constitution. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have government. God is not limited to the denominational practices or the hypocrisy, or for that matter, the obedience of how people practice a religion. God is force itself. And I think that his attacking of organized religion does not address the subject of that he raises, is God great? And to assume that God is reduced to whatever we think or not think he is to miss the point of what God is.
I've got a question from one of our email correspondents, Christopher. It's directed to you from John Fisher of Fort Smith, Arizona. Do you believe in absolute truth, the concept that there is a standard of right and wrong? If yes, where did this standard come from? If no, morals are relative. If that's the case, should criminals be even prosecuted?
Well, I'm not a relativist. It's Jesus of Nazareth who says you have to be without sin to cast the first stone. On that standard, we couldn't convict Charles Manson. If only non-sinners could be on juries, we'd be nowhere. On the other hand, the Old Testament says eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, very barbaric. These are the two bad poles between which we have to, with our innate morality, our innate sense of what's right and wrong, decide these things. Is the questioner telling me that the people of Moses got all the way to Mount Sinai under the impression that murder and theft and perjury were okay, only to be told to their shock at that moment by God, that's not kosher after all? But of course not. They knew that already. Again, everybody knows except the psychopath. We hear the witty diversions
of the question. The question is, what do you believe, Mr. Hitchens? And he gives us a tour of Jesus, Moses. I mean, we still has not said...
I said God is man-made.
I didn't interrupt you,
But do you believe in absolute values?
The question was, do you believe in absolute values? And if not, then how do we prosecute criminals? We didn't ask you what Jesus did or Moses Moses did. Again, he offers nothing but cute little critiques of little inconsistencies. Tell us then, how do we run society? Answer the question.
I was just getting my trousers off, getting my throat cleared. I'm saying that religion doesn't help us decide this question.
But they didn't ask you about religion. They asked you about you. What do you believe in?
I will go on to say that I think our innate morality is good enough, that our understanding that children don't have to be taught the golden rule, that everybody knows in the society exists.
So you believe we should be governed by our innate morality?
There is no society ever found or analyzed or known of where murder, theft, perjury and the rest of it were considered to be okay. We don't need the heavenly permission. We don't need the fear of an almighty big brother or dictator to know this for ourselves. There are people who don't know it, psychopaths and sociopaths. They claim, the religious claim, these people are made in God's image too. That's a problem for them.
Of our prosecuting them, I think, was the question.
Yes.
If we're dealing with our only innate sense of morality, the question then is that for those that you call psychopaths, then how do we bring them in line when their innate morality says, that's not my morality? I mean, if everybody is innately in charge, then what is the basis of the absolute? That's the question.
That's easy. That's easy. You couldn't legislate the Ten Commandments because you couldn't prosecute someone for coveting his neighbor's cattle or wife. You couldn't do that, though it's considered to be a deadly sin.
Let me ask you a question. Let me jump ahead.
I thought the Ten Commandments were mentioned. You couldn't prosecute, nobody prosecutes anyone any longer for adultery or for coveting another woman or man in their hearts.
Okay.
So you could not, in fact, have law that reflected religion. You've gotten to an interesting sweet spot here. Here's a comment made by Hillary Clinton just the other day at the AFSCME, the labor convention, about her need of a belief in God.
Look, I think that a science class should be about science. I think philosophy classes and history classes and social studies classes should be broad-ranging and looking at different points of view, because that's what the debate should be about. But in science, let's stick to science. I mean, one of the problems with the current administration is that they have confused us. I consider myself a person of faith, a religious person, and I don't see any conflict between believing in the power of the Almighty to have created this extraordinary world we're part of in ways that I can't possibly understand, and going to the museum and seeing a dinosaur.
Just recently, Hillary Clinton, who you just heard from in the audio, said that she needed her faith, her Christian faith, to get her through the embarrassment of her husband's behavior in the White House. Yeah. What do you make of that?
Well, so did her husband, if you remember. For the whole of that period, he would not appear without holding a Bible with the cross on the outside, so people didn't wonder what book it was. And he never went anywhere without Billy Graham and Jesse Jackson. He couldn't have got through without faith either. Shows how cheap it is. As for her saying the universe is more complicated than she can understand, that's right. Certainly it's more complicated than she can understand. Why does she say she has faith that God made it then? A nonsensical statement made by a senator from New York City. It shows how religion rots the mind.
Well, I think, again...
And the morals, too. And the morals, too.
To just have the subject matter on who and why and the politics of it does not address the issue. The forms the universe is in, the laws of nature, the fact that we're sitting here with gravity holding us down, we didn't decide that. And I think that I believe God did. I believe personally, unquestionably, unequivocally, that there's a God and a supreme being. And all of the cute talk from Mr. Hitchens still believes there's weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So he's a man of faith. He believes in the unseen and the something that is impossible to still believe. He believes that. So he just has faith misguided. And I'm going to continue to work with Iraq.
With Iraq, you can actually use the argument from design, because a regime that had such weapons, that had gone to a great deal of trouble to conceal them, had a ministry of concealment, in fact, and that had used them several times, could decently be assumed to be still involved with them.
But it was not an assumption that it cost 4,000 lives.
Why on earth? Why do you pretend? Why do you pretend?
Clinton and Billy Graham,
why do you pretend?
Which never happened, by the way. But you cannot.
What do you mean it never happened?
I did not see Billy Graham and Jesse Jackson tour anywhere with Bill Clinton. But again, neither did we see your weapons of mass destruction.
I rest my case. Anyone who looks up that period can see him with both of them all the time. But Why are you pretending you care about evidence when you've already said you just think that God made the law of gravity? You know nothing about either subject.
Well, then tell
you just
me
ask
how it
us to
happened.
take it on faith.
You're the great intellect. Then tell me how we in our own mind was born and decided we'd hold ourselves down, Mr. Hitchens.
Don't be silly.
I'm asking you not to be silly.
Okay, all right. I meant that. Don't be so silly. You are claiming to know more than you can know.
No. I'm asking. You know, every time a question is posed to you, you go back and attack some other variable that has not been raised. I'm asking you, the mighty, brilliant Hitchens, who's never answered a question. Tell us then what it is that you say brought all of this into being.
I put myself in the safekeeping of the audience in that case. I don't think I've dodged any of your questions. The atheist does not say that it can be proved that God does not exist. It said it cannot be proved that he does. So those who say that they know are claiming to know more than they possibly can. They not only claim to know he exists and was the creator,
what do you
more
say,
than they can know.
Chris,
they claim to know his mind.
The religious, you have the problem
they
of
claim
talking
to
someone
know
that
his
has
mind.
a recall. I asked you, since you attacked me saying God didn't make gravity, I asked you. I didn't ask you what the atheist said. I asked you then, how did we get gravity? You go through an analysis of the atheist. We're not talking about the atheist. We're talking about you, Mr. Hitchens. You attacked my statement that God made gravity. If he didn't, then who did? What did?
Don't tempt me by changing the subject.
No, I'm not trying to tempt you. I'm trying to get an answer from you.
Don't tempt me to change the subject from God to Hitchens. It's too much. I was in the middle of a careful sentence. The atheist does not say we know. They say we don't.
You're not the atheist. You're Christopher
we'll be
Hitchens.
right back.
Answer the question.
We'll be right back with the Reverend Al Sharpton and Christopher Hitchens. Hitchens' book is called God is Not Great. We're on the Hardball Plaza.